Ever rabid bike fans see the post-war resumption of the Tour de France Bicycle Marathon with 100 pedal pushers entered from 5 countries, a grind which covers 3 nations. Leaving France, the racers dash into Belgium on the northward leg of the contest. But the punishing stage of the race comes as the cyclists attack the foothills of the Alps between Lyon and Grenoble, reaching an altitude of over 2,000 meters in spots. Many of the 100 have dropped out of the punishing grind, but others labor doggedly on, for the summit is in sight, and the downhill dash brings blessed relief to tortured lungs as they speed toward the Riviera and the halfway mark of the Tour.
Welcome back to the Cycling Iceberg Podcast. Another hilly stage in today's Tour de France with finish in Rouen. In the final 20 kilometers, the riders will take on the Côte de Bonsecours, and actually this 900 meter climb, which is just 7.2%, decided the Tour de France of 1947. You just heard an Irish news item on that Tour de France. To understand how such a short and seemingly insignificant climb became decisive in the Tour de France, we obviously need to go back to 1947. This was the first Tour de France after the Second World War, making it extremely wide open. Racing had been halted for many years, so it was hard to really grasp who would be the big favorite for the race. In the second stage, René Vietto took the lead of the race by winning the stage. Many believed he would now go on to win the Tour. In 1939, the last edition of the race before the Second World War, he had finished second. He was a strong climber, and that he performed so well early on terrain that didn't suit him that well, led many to believe that he had progressed over the years of the war. Vietto, for his part, was less certain about his success. He was wary that he was early in the yellow jersey, it would cost him a lot of energy to defend, and he knew that he wasn't as strong as he was in 1939. Vietto held up well, and with 3 stages to go, he was still leading. He had a minute and a half lead over Pierre Brambilla. The 19th stage was an individual time trial. It was the longest time trial in Tour history. In the stage, Vietto lost considerable time. Brambilla took over the lead of the general classification because Vietto significantly underperformed. There was speculation about why he performed badly. Some newspapers wrote that it was because of the motor accident of a friend, while others said he drank a bottle of cider during the time trial, which made him feel bad. Now Pierre Brambilla was expected to win the Tour. There was just 1 stage remaining. There were, however, still riders who wanted to make an attempt at winning the Tour themselves. One of them was Jean Robic. Robic started the Tour as a very unknown rider. He had become pro during the war, which obviously meant his name recognition was relatively low. There were few races in the Second World War, and the ones that did take place were obviously not at top of the mind of the French population. At the start of the race, Robic was hardly interviewed by journalists. It was in fact speculated that his retirement on the first day would not have even earned him more than a small line at the bottom of the results page. Robic, for his part, was quite confident in the fact that he could do well. He had recently married his wife Raymonde and promised her he would bring her a Tour's yellow jersey as wedding present. Robic performed very well early on in the race. He finished 9th in the first stage and managed to win the 4th stage from Luxembourg to Strasbourg. He rode well through the Alps. Looking back on that edition, journalist René de la Tour said, and yet the journalists, I among them, still didn't think Robic was a Tour winner, despite his performances in the Alps. We thought, more than ever, that the next day, when the route included the Great Galibier, Robic would disappear out of the picture. The Franco-Italian Calmellini would be untouchable up there in the snow walls. It seemed that Robic could not ride well 2 days in a row. Consistency is the biggest quality needed in the Tour, he seemed to be lacking it. Robic, however, didn't have any problems at all with remaining consistent. He did well, sat in 5th in GC, and then moved into 3rd after the time trial. The 21st stage of the Tour took the riders from Caen to Paris, a stage of 260 kilometers. At the time, there was no protocol that the final stage was a regular stage. In fact, many times the organizers would schedule an extra long final stage in the hope that riders who had lost time in the mountains could recoup some of that time in an audacious all-or-nothing attack. Robic gave exactly what the Tour organizers had hoped for. When the riders reached Bonsecours, just outside of Rouen, Robic attacked on the short climb. Another Frenchman, Edouard Vachleitner, went with him. Yellow jersey Brambilla tried to follow, but he couldn't stick with him. About the attack, de la Tour wrote, Robic had nothing to lose but his third place. He had everything to gain. He jumped away as if his life depended on it. Luckily, I had swapped from my car to a motorbike. I watched from close by as every moment of the drama unfolded. When Robic opened a gap of a few lengths, Brambilla made a terrific effort to get back. It seemed that was that. Threat neutralized. Then, from the bunch behind, the great rider Vachleitner sprinted past both of them. Robic jumped to the wheel, but Brambilla failed, and that's where he lost the Tour. Brambilla came back in the peloton, but there he didn't receive much help. He was unliked, because he was riding for a team of Italians living in France. He waited, saved some energy, but once he started chasing, it was too late. There had been a group of riders ahead of Robic and Vachleitner. Those had all lost too much time already to contest the overall. However, Vachleitner still stood a chance. Léo Véron of the French national team therefore told Lucien Techier to drop back and help Vachleitner to try and force victory over Robic. The three eventually caught the other leaders 100k from the finish, after which Vachleitner attacked multiple times. Robic remained glued to the wheel, knowing this was the only rival he needed to follow. After several attacks, Robic went up to Vachleitner and said, "Ride with me. You'll come second, but I'll give you 100,000 francs." That seemed straightforward to Vachleitner, so he rode. In his head he thought, if he cracks or crashes, I'll be the one in prime position to win the Tour. Unfortunately, neither of those things happened, but he paid the 100,000 francs. Not to me, but to the French national team, which was the rule. However, this led to another outburst from René Vietto, who said, "You poor fool. You should have asked for a lot more money. How much is this going to be worth once we've shared it among all of us?" Robic had nothing to do with this internal drama in the French national team. He had started racing for the regional team Northwest France. It was quite surprising that a rider from the regional team won the Tour, but it had happened before. There were a few interesting things to Robic's victory. First of all, he wasn't the fastest rider in the race. Vachleitner had taken 3 minutes and 22 seconds less to complete the Tour, but Robic had picked up time bonuses in the Pyrenees, which helped him win. Furthermore, he had never led the race until the final stage. That final stage was so fast it finished an hour ahead of schedule. There are some rumors that Brambilla was so disappointed after losing the final stage that he buried his bike in his garden, disgusted with the sport. In that 1947 Tour, there was another Frenchman that made his debut, Raphael Geminiani. Geminiani was always passionate about bike racing. He grew up in Clermont-Ferrand. First he worked in his father's bike shop, but he really dreamt of a racing career like his older brother. However, his father discouraged him by pointing to his legs and asking, "Have you ever seen a racer with legs as skinny as yours?" Despite that, Raphael trained hard and eventually fought his way through. When he wasn't needed in the shop, he rode into the Central Massif, doing long rides. And in 1943, he qualified for the National Junior Road Race. With a decisive attack on the final hill, he claimed victory. The paths of Robic and Geminiani would cross multiple times, but that wasn't the case yet in that 1947 Tour. While Geminiani made his debut, he wasn't up to the challenge. His thin frame was ill-suited to the rough post-war Tour routes. The destroyed and uneven cobblestones tossed his light body around. He lost 20 minutes in the first stage. Things went from bad to worse on stage 3. Although advertised as 365 kilometers, the stage ended up exceeding 400 kilometers. Riders were not only battling the distance, but also the hottest summer in decades. Riders raided cafes for bars and drinks, fought over the last drops from fountains, and got sprayed on by firemen. That night, Geminiani was too exhausted to eat dinner. He later said, "It was so hot, the tar was melting. I was completely dehydrated. I stopped by a farm and drank dirty water from the cattle trough. That's how I got foot and mouth disease, which usually only cows get." The next morning, Geminiani awoke nearly blind with a high fever. he abandoned the race and was hospitalized. Instead of showing compassion, the newspapers heavily criticized his tour selection, with rumors circulating that his father had bribed the selectors. The outrage grew when he was selected again in 1948. This time it wasn't just that he had performed bad a year prior. What added to it was that he defeated French cycling hero Jean Blanc in a race near Clermont-Ferrand, just days before the Tour. Beating a profound champion in a criterium was unacceptable in the peloton. Other riders needed to respect them. This time, however, Geminiani managed to silence his critics. In the mountains, he was climbing alongside names like Bobet, Robic and Gino Bartali. Over the next years, Geminiani gained notoriety not just for his cycling powers, but also for his fiery temperament. Although he finished second to Hugo Coblet in the 1951 Tour, his momentum faltered the following year with an 11th place in Paris. Meanwhile, the star of Louison Bobet was on the rise. Although Bobet skipped Grand Tours in 1952, he was impressive everywhere else. In 1953, he returned to share leadership at the Tour with Geminiani, who had become French champion but had struggled most of the season. By the 12th stage, Geminiani's poor performances effectively handed leadership of the French national team to Bobet. Despite Geminiani not performing well, it infuriated him that he had to work for Bobet. The previous year, he had already given up leadership due to internal conflicts. Tensions completely escalated and boiled over in the 13th stage. Jean Robic, who raced for the regional team again, was the best ranked general classification rider. In that stage, he got targeted by a long-range attack, which was launched by Geminiani, Bobet, Roland, Lauredi, and several non-team riders. While Lauredi sprinted to the stage win, Geminiani managed second, but that cost Bobet valuable bonus seconds. After the stage, Bobet told the media he felt betrayed by his teammate. Aggravated by Bobet's accusations, Geminiani dumped his dinner on Bobet's head. Bobet, equally hot-tempered, stormed off in tears. The next morning, both men, however, apologized to each other, marking a turning point in their relation. Geminiani became Bobet's luxury domestique and guided the relatively inexperienced rider to his first of 3 Tour victories. After that, the two became close friends. Geminiani credited this maturity to an incident with Robic in 1952. After the stage to Namur, Robic held a press conference in a bath. He was bragging. "I played dead so I wouldn't have to work. Now I have plenty of chances. Geminiani should mourn his tour." In response, Geminiani forced his way through the journalists and dunked Robic's head underwater. Soigneur Lebert pulled them apart, saying, "If you fight like this, only the opposition benefits. Work together instead of squabbling, and you can both win." This advice resonated with Geminiani and influenced how he handled later disputes. Robic bragging was nothing new. While he benefited from another rider being disliked in the 1947 Tour, he was actually disliked in the peloton for the rest of his career. In fact, in 1959, Robic finished outside of the time limit in the stage to Chalon-sur-Saône. This stage was won by Brian Robinson, a British rider with an unusually large lead of 20 minutes. Normally, the judges would make an exception in such cases, especially for a former winner like Robic, but his personality is said to have gone against him and he was put out of the race, no exceptions. Part of the reason behind this was that the judges didn't like his bragging. He once dismissed the great Gino Bartali, saying he had a Fausto copy in each leg, meaning he was twice as good as Bartali. Further, he was the master of exploiting rules. Because he was relatively small and light, he collected lead-filled drinking bottles at the top of major climbs to improve his descending skills. When the organizers banned this, he picked up bottles filled with mercury instead. In 2007, André Mahé said that Robic found himself so important he would often stand in the doorway of a restaurant until all the diners had noticed him, and then he would proudly announce, "Oui, c'est moi, Robic. Yes, it's me, Jean Robic." While Robic might not have been appreciated in the peloton, his success meant he was loved in certain areas of France. After that 1947 tour, he never won the Tour again. In fact, he didn't even finish on the podium, but he did have other successes. In 1950, he became cyclocross world champion. He took several smaller wins, but that first Tour de France victory after the Second World War made him loved and appreciated in certain parts of the country. The chances that this tour will be decided on the Côte de Bonsecours are fairly slim. Nevertheless, now you should know everything there is to know about this history and what the commentators mean when they talk about the monument of Jean Robic on the climb.